On November 6, 2025, the Central Asian presidents will gather in Washington, D.C. That's never happened before. In fact, most of the Central Asian leaders have never made a formal visit to the U.S. capital, much less all at once. The summit will be the crowning achievement for a little-noticed format. For a decade, U.S. foreign policy in Central Asia has been channeled through the C5+1. Centered on nearly annual meetings of the 6 countries' foreign ministers, the C5+1 has enabled the United States to approach and deal with the distant region collectively. This is particularly important as the region's place in U.S. foreign policy has evolved beyond the war in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the 5 Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, have deepened regional cooperation on their own in the face of revanchist Russia and an ever-expanding China. Often, the C5+1 ministerial meetings have taken place on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly each year in September. A high point was the first ever U.S. Central Asia Leaders Meeting in September 2023, when U.S. President Joe Biden met with his Central Asian counterparts. But the UN General Assembly came and went in 2025 without even a foreign ministers-level C5+1 meeting. It wasn't until late October that news broke. The Central Asian presidents would be coming to Washington for a summit on November 6. As the C5+1 marks the 10th anniversary of its first meeting, the question stands, is the C5+1 still relevant? You're watching The Diplomat Asia, your go-to source for Asia-Pacific news and analysis. In this episode, we discuss the C5+1 and the future of U.S. Central Asia relations. The United States was among the first countries in the world to recognize the newly independent states of Central Asia in the aftermath of the Soviet Union's 1991 collapse. From the onset, the U.S. aimed to help the region emerge from 70 years of Soviet domination.
Well, I think in talking about the C5+1, which really was remarkable, it doesn't seem so now, but it truly was in 2015, we really need to start with 1991 and what the United States was trying to do with all the newly independent states of the former Soviet Union. The United States wanted to support their transition to hopefully being market economies, to changing their political systems to allow for more participation by people, and a variety of things that I think you understand very well about this period. Fast forward to 2015, and the countries had more experience as sovereign states. But there were still many, many issues, legacy issues and new challenges both. And so I think the C5+1 came along in part because some of the challenges had been among the C5 states.
Water in particular was a contentious cross-border issue. Uzbekistan had deep disagreements with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan over the use of water resources, especially upstream plans for hydropower projects that could affect the downstream flow. In 2012, then Uzbek President Islam Karimov had suggested that problems over water could spark war. Today, many experts declare that water resources could tomorrow become a problem around which relations deteriorate. And not only in our region. Everything can be so aggravated that this can spark not simply serious confrontation, but even wars, Karimov said. On the United States' part, there was an interest in the challenges Central Asia faces and an appetite for helping the region solve them.
Now, in terms of why this was important for the United States, I think we had then a Secretary of State who saw himself as a global problem solver. He was interested in big issues, like Iran. He had a great personal interest in the issue of climate change. And I think that was the kind of thing that motivated him to come to Central Asia for the first time and participate in this format. And his presence, I think, was decisively important because of those lingering challenges that still existed.
And so in 2015, John Kerry became the first U.S. Secretary of State to visit all 5 Central Asian republics in a single trip. His grand stand slam took him through Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. In the historic city of Samarkand on November 1st, 2015, Kerry inaugurated the C5+1 format with his regional counterparts. The United States framed its engagement with Central Asia via the C5+1 as in support of the region's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. Kerry further described the effort as far from a zero-sum game. Every country, he said, has the right to manage its relationships with whichever country it chooses, or not, to be free from external pressure and from intimidation. The wider context is important too. In 2015, the geopolitics of Eurasia were in flux.
The C5 was formed in 2015 primarily because of three reasons. First of all, Russia's attack on Crimea. So Central Asian countries, since they are deeply reliant on Russia for their economic and security needs, and when they saw that Russia was not so friendly with its other neighbors, so they wanted to have other partners, and it goes along with their long-standing multi-vector foreign policy, which is basically the idea that they want to have friendly relations with all global powers if that is to their national interest. So first is that, and the second one being US's receding footprint in the region. So US was slowly winding down its operation in Afghanistan, and it would lose its constant communication with these countries and state leaders. So US wanted to maintain its presence in the region, and it was a good way of doing that, right? Creating this diplomatic forum where leaders could come together and discuss the issues that would affect both parties. And the third being to counter China's growing presence in the region. So all five Central Asian countries are part of this Belt and Road Initiative, which basically gives China more space in terms of economic investment and all that. So US wanted to counter that because US and China are what we consider rival countries. So I think for these three reasons, the United States and Central Asian countries thought it is in their best interest to have some kind of diplomatic platform where they can discuss the issues that affects both parties.
The rise of the C5+1 in 2015 was no accident. It was a diplomatic and bureaucratic response to a challenging and changing geopolitical landscape. But its success over the next decade had far more to do with changes in Central Asia than wisdom in Washington. Besides being an iconic Silk Road city, Samarkand was also the hometown of Uzbekistan's first president, Islam Karimov. Situated at the heart of Central Asia, Uzbekistan is fundamental to effective regional cooperation and any foreign initiatives built upon it. Uzbekistan's foreign policy during the Karimov era often tended toward isolationism, making it difficult for regional cooperation to take deep root. Nevertheless, powers such as Japan engaged in diplomatic efforts that approached Central Asia collectively. In 2004, Japan launched its Central Asia plus Japan dialogue, and over the years met with quiet success, creating a model that the U.S. would turn to when circumstances both demanded and allowed. Tashkent's fraught relations with the United States in the aftermath of the 2005 Andijan massacre forestalled deeper collaboration for a decade. But in 2015, amid Russian revanchism and Chinese expansion, Karimov had an apparent change of heart.
But by that time, Islam Karimov had been president of the country for a very long time, and his policies, while they certainly weren't detrimental to the country, and that he had provided a lot of stability, but the future, I think, was very uncertain, and it wasn't clear they were going to be able to take this independent, solitary path into the future. And so as, life was going along, I think he must have made a decision that there's no harm in talking. The stakes are low enough if it's just the foreign ministers coming together. I'm doing this in my hometown, why not?
When Karimov died the following year, Uzbek presidency was taken up by a man who put regional cooperation at the forefront of his foreign policy. Shavkat Mirziyoyev's rise to power in Uzbekistan has had a transformational effect on Central Asia thanks to his active promotion of regional cooperation. Mirziyoyev's efforts have yielded results, including the settlement of long contentious border negotiations between Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. This emphasis on regional cooperation and the wide-ranging benefits therein exposed fertile ground for the C5+1 to also make progress.
Uzbekistan and its willingness to play a role, particularly when President Mirziyoyev came to power, and there was an entirely new attitude toward neighbors, and instead of seeing them as threats, now there was an opportunity to see them as potential partners.
Since the first C5+1 meeting in Samarkand in 2015, there have been roughly annual foreign minister-level meetings and one leaders-level summit. The pattern of these meetings is telling, however, and exposes the format's fragility in the face of shifting U.S. foreign policy goals and styles. In August 2016, Secretary of State John Kerry hosted the Central Asian Foreign Ministers in Washington. The following September, after a change of government in the United States, then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Donald Trump's first Secretary of State, held a C5+1 ministerial on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, generating hopes that the format could survive the vicissitudes of U.S. domestic politics. The C5+1, however, wouldn't meet again at the foreign ministers level until 2019, although C5+1 meetings below the highest levels took place in Tashkent and Kazakh capital, briefly renamed Nur-Sultan, in July 2018 and August 2019. Meanwhile, Uzbek President Mirziyoyev saw considerable bilateral engagement, including a coveted visit to the White House in March 2018. In September 2019, the Central Asian foreign ministers and their U.S. counterpart, at that time Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, once again met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. In early February 2020, Pompeo traveled to Tashkent for a C5+1 meeting, one of his last in-person engagements before the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world. In June of that year, a virtual summit took place. The Biden administration took office in January 2021, and in April, Secretary of State Antony Blinken hosted another virtual C5+1 meeting. The next year, once again on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, Blinken met with the 5 Central Asian foreign ministers. In March 2023, the C5+1 returned to Central Asia with a meeting in Astana, Kazakhstan. This was followed in September 2023 with the C5+1's first leaders-level summit. In the resulting joint statement, the New York Declaration, the 6 presidents laid out their ambitions to further enhance their partnership, building on a C5+1 secretariat that had been formed in 2022 and existing working groups on economy, energy and the environment, and security.
C5+1 has been quite effective because they have maintained cooperation basically on 3 fronts. Like first is the economic front, so basically having deeper ties, economic ties, more trade with Central Asian countries, especially when it comes to rare earth minerals, where global powers are competing over, and Central Asia holds a massive reserve of those minerals. So that's one. And the second one being on the environmental front. So Central Asian countries have a big problem of desertification. So the US has been lending technical support as well as economic support to counter that, like the Aral Sea desertification and preservation of Caspian Sea, right? And the third one being a security cooperation. After US's withdrawal from Afghanistan, there were concerns in the region that this radical movement would spread to Central Asian countries, and in some countries we do see these elements quite active, at least in the early days. So to help these countries counter those radical elements, they have conducted joint exercises, and the US has provided technical and other support.
In September 2024, the foreign ministers once again met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, with Blinken highlighting progress made since the New York Declaration, including the launching of a C5+1 critical minerals dialogue and a B5+1 business forum.
The fact that there have been these fairly regular meetings, these contacts at the UN at a very senior level, a presidential meeting in 2023 in New York, I think that's incredibly important, but also the creation of a secretariat in 2022. I think that also matters a great deal. There are working groups now, and they're tackling various issues, which means it's become much more serious. There's much more meat in it than there used to be.
2025 marks the C5+1's 10th anniversary, but the UN General Assembly came and went without a C5+1 meeting, despite the presence of all 5 Central Asian presidents and their foreign ministers in New York. It seemed for a time that the C5+1 might fall victim to Trump's transactional and bilateral preferences, not to mention the administration's hyper-focus on domestic issues such as immigration and downsizing of the U.S. government, including slashing the diplomatic corps. Secretary of State Marco Rubio mentioned the C5+1 in bilateral engagements with Central Asia foreign ministers earlier in the year, and the Trump administration oversaw several high-profile deals with Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in September. But it wasn't until late October that news emerged that the Central Asian presidents would be coming to Washington for a summit on November 6.
I think C5+1 is really relevant, especially for the Central Asian countries, because they have relied on Russia for a long time. So they have relied on Russia for their security needs, economic needs, but we know that lately China is also making inroads in these countries. So if the US does not engage with Central Asia, then these countries will be much under Russian and Chinese influence, and I think the US wouldn't want to see that. And also for Central Asian countries, they have long held this multi-vector foreign policy, right? So they want to engage with all global powers, right? Regardless of their political leanings or regardless of their political makeup, they want to engage with these countries. So it makes sense for Central Asian countries to leverage on their cordial relationship with all major powers. So there is much to achieve via this platform. So I think this partnership will continue, and then we'll see deeper engagement between Central Asian countries and the US in the days ahead.
The conditions that gave rise to the C5+1 remain very much the same in the Central Asian region and the larger geopolitical context, and thus the motivation for maintaining and further deepening the C5+1 is obvious. Now it's time to find out what U.S. Central Asia policy will look like under Trump 2.0. Thanks for watching The Diplomat Asia. Now you know all about the C5+1 as it marks a decade framing U.S. Central Asia relations. If you're enjoying our content, visit thediplomat.com for comprehensive coverage of Asia-Pacific geopolitics. Use the link in the description for 10% off your first-year subscription. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth information on major events and trends in the Asia-Pacific region. Leave a comment below if there's a topic you'd like to see covered by The Diplomat. If you like this video, check out our explainer on the history of ASEAN and the challenges the Southeast Asia bloc faces.